Then we'll first have opening remarks from His Excellency Young-gil, Deputy Prime Minister of Korea and Minister of Economy and Finance. Let's meet him.
내외 기빈 여러분, 오늘 참석해 주신 스티글리츠 교수님께서는 바이러스는 여건이 필요 없다라고 말씀하신 바 있습니다. 저는 기후변화도 여건이 필요 없다라고 말씀드리고 싶습니다. 기후변화의 충격은 국경을 초월하여 영향을 미치며 일부 국가의 노력만으로는 결코 극복할 수가 없는 것입니다. 한국의 녹색전환, 녹색포용, 녹색협력이라고 하는 세 가지 녹색 행동이 전 세계의 녹색회복 정책을 발전시키는 새 바람으로서 기여하기를 바라며 오늘 컨퍼런스에서 지구촌의 그린경제 대전환을 위한 혁신적인 생각과 담대한 비전이 활발하게 논의되기를 바랍니다.
Climate action and COVID-19 recovery measures must be mutually supportive to be effective. This is a promise of the Green New Deal. It's aimed to foster sustainable growth through catalyzing investment in green, resilient infrastructure, technologies, business models, and institutions. Investment in priority climate solutions, including renewable energy, low-carbon cities, energy efficiency, sustainable transport, climate-resilient agriculture, and ecosystem restoration, generate substantial socio-economic co-benefits, including job creation. Korea is providing an example to the world of how to deal with COVID-19 in the way it has controlled efficiently the spread of the virus through tracking and treating. The Korean government is also a strong supporter of GCF, and I am delighted to announce that this week we have signed a contribution agreement with Korea to provide $200 million to GCF. Thank you, Deputy Prime Minister, and thank you to the people of South Korea. Thanks to this and other contribution, GCF replenishment has now reached over $10 billion at current exchange rates. The Korean Green New Deal aims to move the economy away from its heavy reliance on fossil fuels and promote environmentally friendly industries powered by digital technologies, including electric and hydrogen cars, smart grids, and telemedicine. It could propel the country to the global leadership in sustainable economic growth.
But a critical thing as we think about rebuilding the economy is we have to build back greener. A research project that I was involved in with Nick Stern at London School of Economics, Cameron Hepburn at Oxford, and his colleagues at Oxford showed that green investments, green spending can be timely, labor-intensive, high multiplier. High multiplier means that it can be get a big bang for the buck. For every dollar you can spend, you can get a lot of stimulus. Labor intensive means it will have per dollar a lot of jobs created, and that's particularly important in those countries where the unemployment rate has gone up. But it's also important in those countries where robotization, AI, threatens the future of work. A key aspect of the green economy is innovation. And this is an area where Korea will almost surely excel. Korea has already shown itself to be at the frontier and leading in one of the technologies of the future, hydrogen. They had the first commercial fuel cell electric fuel vehicle, the largest fuel cell manufacturing plant in 2015. It's already been identified here in Korea as a new growth engine. The government has expressed its commitment to creating the first public-private hydrogen vehicle ecosystem by 2022. And I'm especially excited by the recent announcement of hydrogen cities, of 3 cities, and a 4th city that will be specialized in research and development in hydrogen technology. I've watched Korea's amazing progress over the past 40 years. I've seen the process by which Korea rapidly caught up. And then I watched with admiration as it was able to exercise its technological leadership in areas like ships and smartphones. This is another area which is critical for Korea's future, and it's equally critical for the future of the world.
Koreans are very often lauded for their resilience, innovation, and diligence. If we can just muster the courage and resolve to think about tackling climate change more ambitiously and commit to more concrete targets like net zero 2050 in Europe, I have no doubt it could be the beginning of the second miracle on the Han River that will lead to stronger climate actions, create green jobs for Korean workers, and pay huge dividends later in many forms, including vastly improved air quality and health, and the virtuous cycle of being a leader in green technology that in turn leads to more innovation. We can green our recovery efforts. In essence, build back better than before the pandemic, so we do not just go back to doing business as usual. The planet is showing clear signs that we must not go back.
We will encourage a paradigm shift, the adjustment of the industrial structure to enable innovative changes in industry and energy so that we can build a sustainable, carbon-neutral society where there is a virtuous cycle of the resources.
Ahead lies a narrow window, but a vast opportunity. We have a clear choice. Invest in the past or invest in the future. The important work of the GCF is required more than ever as we accelerate the decarbonization of the global economy and strengthen resilience and adaptation across the developing world.
The Green New Deal is an opportunity to build the high-tech, high-wage green industries of the future, with massive export and job creation potential that will not only help the country to recover, but to build back better and stronger than before.
The world is not differentiated by boundaries. What happens in one country affects the other. So when we're talking about a global Green Deal, we are refreshing our mind back with the Sustainable Development Goals and how can we accelerate and speed up the achievement of those goals.
The GCF has been instrumental in supporting Armenia to help us scale up the government's efforts to promote electric mobility in the country and in the long term electrify Armenia's transport and the economy at large.
And also practitioners to craft green economic stimulus measures, especially post the COVID-19 time when the transition and the policies needs to be in place when the economy recovers.
If we're talking about recovery, of course, can mean going back to something, recovering something that we had. That's exactly the kind of a recovery we should not be aiming for right now. We are in big trouble if we aim for a recovery that takes us back to what we used to do. But I think that there is a positive conclusion to draw from this, that looking at the global picture, we are seeing significant progress being made, significant evidence that in the decisions on investment and the allocation of capital, that people are waking up not only to the risks of not changing our behavior, but also waking up to the opportunities that are there to grow our economy in a way that is healthy for our environment in the future.
Thank you, Mr. Moderator. Let me elaborate on 4 short points. First, more than ever, in this period of COVID-19 crisis, we must maintain a strong climate ambition. This year, we will celebrate the 5th anniversary of the Paris Agreement. After 20 years of negotiations, this agreement has set in stone a collective goal that is an essential point for the preservation of ecosystems and people's living conditions. In this context, our priority must be to ensure that each signatory country translates its commitments into public policies. The postponement of COP26 in Glasgow to November 2021 due to the COVID-19 epidemic gives a particular dimension to the issue of green recovery policies that we are discussing today. Like climate change, the COVID-19 crisis is a flagrant revelation of the interdependencies and vulnerabilities of our countries. It also calls for strengthened multilateral actions based on science and solidarity.
But we didn't stop for this, but we took the philosophy. We want to invest actually in key sectors that contribute in the future to climate protection, environmental protection, and that really makes also a contribution to save our world in this regard from climate. So let me mention 3 possibilities how we think very specifically one can do it on a national basis. Much more electric mobility, I think, is one very important aspect for us. But then also, for example, I think for many of us, municipalities, cities, they are very important for environmental friendly behavior. So we want to strengthen their way, for example, that they have electric mobility, that they don't use any more carbon. But also, for example, energy efficiency with buildings. I think it's one, it was mentioned, I think by the representative of IRENA, is one very important aspect. We have to make our buildings much more energy efficient. So, and these are measures that we are now taking, because I think one of the most important aspects is that we don't only appeal to make these kind of measures, but that we really start now taking them on a national basis, but also on a basis of the European Union, and even much more also on the level of the international community.
At BlackRock, early this year in January, before the COVID-19 crisis began, Larry Fink, CEO of BlackRock, has delivered a letter to our client explaining that we are making sustainability central to the way that we invest, to manage risk, and execute our stewardship responsibilities. This commitment is based on our conviction that climate risk is an investment risk, and that sustainability integrated portfolios and climate integrated portfolios in particular can produce better long-term risk-adjusted returns. The evidence on climate risk is compelling investors to reassess core assumptions about the modern finance. These questions are driving a profound reassessment of risk and asset values. We believe that in the near future, and sooner than most anticipate, there will be a significant reallocation of capital toward green investments. We are investing and engaging with the companies to create long-term shareholders' value for our client. This reflects our approach to sustainability across BlackRock's investment processes, in which we use environmental, social, and governance, i.e. ESG factors, in order to provide client with the better risk-adjusted returns.
Good afternoon, ladies and gentlemen. I would like to begin by congratulating Korea's Ministry of Economy and Finance, as well as the Green Climate Fund and the whole organizing team for putting together such a timely conference, despite all the logistical challenges. It's my pleasure today to share with you snippets of analysis my colleagues around the world have been doing around the ongoing energy transition. I would like to begin by looking back 10 years ago on the power sector and sharing with you what was the most popular source of new electricity generation back then. As you can see on this map, you see a lot of dark colors, black, light, and dark gray. These signify thermal power plants, which were fueled by primarily coal, in some cases natural gas, and in some cases oil. If you look at 2014, we see a bit more yellow and blue on this chart, which signifies solar and wind. And by last year, even more yellow and light blue. The popularity of solar and wind were increasing. In fact, if we tally up the net generation capacity addition between 2009 and 2019, during that period, solar was the #1 capacity added to the system, exceeding that of coal. And even wind exceeded that of gas. On an electricity generation basis, solar and wind are now contributing roughly around 10% of total electricity in the world, whereas 10 years ago they were almost nothing. This has of course been enabled by initially subsidies in the form of feed-in tariffs and other schemes. These subsidies were critical to unlock private capital investment in clean energy. Between 2009 and 2019, there was just under $3 trillion invested in clean energy, most of it going to solar and wind. That investment enabled scaling up of production capacity for these technologies, as well as accelerate their deployment. It allowed the efficiency of the technologies to improve and bring down the cost of the equipment. The combination of these factors has meant that the cost of generating electricity from solar and wind has substantially declined over the last decade. In fact, by the beginning of this year, in majority of the world, the cost of new electricity generation from a solar or a wind farm is the lowest, is the cheapest option that we have. And by 2050, purely on an economic basis, we expect solar and wind to contribute 50% of the world's electricity. If you add up the rest of the zero-carbon electricity, we are looking at zero-carbon electricity being about 70% of the total electricity produced by 2050. That may seem very positive. Unfortunately, this result is not good enough. For the power sector alone, we would have to accelerate the decarbonization rate to have the chance to reach 2-degree pathway, let alone 1.5 degree. More importantly, we should remember that electricity is only part of the story. Electricity only accounts less than 20% of final energy demand. The rest of that final energy demand comes from molecules, which today are dominated by oil and in some cases coal and gas. Based on current trajectories, electrification will accelerate, but only to account for 25% of final energy demand. For the remainder, we need to look for clean molecules, particularly where we look at hard-to-abate sectors like heavy-duty transport, steel, cement manufacturing. We need clean molecules, and this is why we hear a lot about hydrogen. To be able to meet the 1.5 degree pathway, the most plausible scenario requires us to first and foremost accelerate investment in energy efficiency to reduce final energy demand. Then we need to accelerate electrification so that electrification accounts for just over half of final energy demand, and make sure that electricity is generated from clean sources. And the remaining molecular form of energy will have to come from clean molecules such as hydrogen. Now, if you remember the investment chart that I showed you earlier, we need at a minimum to accelerate that investment by a factor of 4. And the current stimulus measures to address the adverse impact of the COVID-19 pandemic are a great opportunity to accelerate that investment. Unfortunately, when we look at the stimulus measures approved so far, as you can see on this chart, while there has been significant green stimulus measures announced, there's also been a lot of stimulus measures announced that actually increase CO2 emissions. If you look at green stimulus alone, the top 4 countries so far are Korea, followed by the 3 European countries, France, Germany, and the UK, And this is great, and we'll hear later on from the honorable ambassadors from these countries. What's unfortunate about this charter is that you don't see the top 3 economies of the world, US, China, and Japan. In the aftermath of the global financial crisis, those economies also announced green stimulus measures. So far, we haven't seen any measures announced from those. Even from the countries like Korea that have announced green stimulus measures, the problem is when you look at the total stimulus, and here we're looking at the whole world, they've also announced stimulus measures that accelerate CO2 emissions. These are things like bailouts for airlines, tax breaks for consumers to buy vehicles. We don't need such measures. We need to make sure that the stimulus is more green. Right now, for every $1 of green stimulus, there's $7 for CO2 intensive stimulus. And we certainly don't need stimulus packages such as the one Australia announced earlier this week, I apologize, with their gas-fired recovery plan. Such stimulus measures are not only incompatible with addressing climate change, they're financially irresponsible. There are still many corporate and political leaders that talk about climate change as a potential issue in the future. We are living climate change today. The picture you're looking at, many people in the room would know where this is. This is the Jiangsu Bridge over the Han River, not far from our venue today. It was flooded for a record 8 days straight last month. The Korean New Deal has been great, but the Korean government needs to do more. There are many measures it can take, the most important initial step being legislating a legally binding net zero target. You may have seen these haunting images from the US West Coast from last week. These images should remind us that we are running out of time. And I believe I'm out of time. Thank you.
Thank you very much, Mr. Azadi. The last presentation will be given by Ms. Elizabeth Press, Director of Planning and Program Support of IRENA. Please, Elizabeth, please.
Thank you very much, and many thanks to the government of Korea and the Green Climate Fund for including us in this discussion. You know, a lot has been said until now, both in introductory session and our panel to now. And most of the speakers have mentioned renewable energy. So I will zoom in this presentation on renewable energy and renewables-based energy transition to see what is it that we can do in the context of COVID recovery to accelerate progress towards Paris Agreement, but also meet other objectives than necessary. Next, please. I'm just going to have to ask for my slides to be flicked through because I'm obviously virtually connected. So the colleague from Bloomberg already spoke about the costs of renewable energy, and really the business case of renewables has changed so much in the last decade that it's not possible to argue that the cost competitiveness in the context of new capacity to be added to a global energy system. On this slide, you see how different technologies compare with fossil fuels, and we estimate that this trend of competitiveness will continue with falling costs in the coming years. And also important to know that technologies that are enabling renewables to be deployed at scale are also becoming more cost competitiveness, most notably storage, which is one of the key solutions. Next, please. And that obviously has resulted in dramatic growth and increase of renewable capacity. This trend here shows that increasingly in the last 10 years or so, renewables were a capacity of choice. And in 2019 alone, we estimated 72% of new capacity was renewable, with solar and wind driving the change. And I want to reflect on what Minister Ghaplanyan mentioned for the Armenian case. This is not only a matter of cost competitiveness, it is also a matter of energy security. We should remind ourselves that 80% of countries are actually fossil fuels importers, and every single country on the planet has some sort of renewable energy available, some potential to be exploited. This is really important to remember as we move forward, as what we have seen, what we have observed in the recovery space. Transformation of the energy system is not necessarily on the top of everybody's agenda. Next, please. So this, we really need to emphasize the multiple benefits of placing energy transition, energy transformation investments at the heart of a stimulus. Our Director General mentioned in the opening remarks that we estimated around 2 trillion need to be invested in next 3 years to make this dramatic shift that needs to be taking place in order to put us on the pathway to decarbonization by mid-century. And I want to mention that what we did, we actually looked at 2050 and went back to see how we can use these 3 years of a really unique situation in which we all found ourselves to make this shift. And I think there is many have done analysis, and I think there is a consensus around where these investments need to happen. They need to go to renewable energy, they need to go to energy efficiency, which is fundamentally important if we want to decarbonize the energy system, and they need to go to enabling infrastructure, the infrastructure that will enable the high share of renewables to run in grids and to be expanded to accelerate access. Obviously, the innovation needs to go along with all of this. It needs to be prioritized so that we can find the solutions for the end-use sectors. Next slide, please. What this investment would do, it would actually contribute in socioeconomic terms significantly, and this is exactly what governments are looking for right now. We have worked on the job assessments for a decade now, which in the COVID situation has proven incredibly useful, because we were able to estimate in quite some detail what the impact of such an investment would actually mean in terms of jobs. So 5.5 million jobs would be created, and that is after the job losses that would emerge in the fossil fuel sector. So we estimate that approximately 25 jobs per $1 million would occur. And that is, I think somebody mentioned actually in the previous remarks, that is about at least 3 times more than what would happen in fossil fuel situation. But what is really important is, and obviously that the GDP and economic activities would flourish along with such an investment. Next, please. What is important to remember, next. What is important to understand is that where are these jobs? How can we benefit best? How countries can benefit best based on their local capabilities? And IRENA has over the years looked at the value chain and where the jobs occur, so that there is a greater understanding. So we're not just talking about this great possibility, but also have a deeper understanding how they emerge along the value chain. And this is one of my favorite slides that I often speak to, because it shows that in solar and wind, the concentration of jobs is operation and maintenance. That means that these are long-term jobs. These are jobs that there is a local potential to create employment and stability that is required. But to achieve this, it's not sufficient to look at the energy sector. Next slide, please. What we have emphasized in our report on the COVID recovery is that the holistic planning has to take place that looks across different areas and see how this all fits together and align the policy with the priorities of governments. So number one is ambition, obviously the domestic priorities, what is it that the country needs to achieve. We emphasize the nationally determined contributions that they're due this year. This is an opportunity to also increase ambition in that space. But in addition to the investments and areas that I spoke about, it is really important to remember that the education and reskilling area is necessary in order to prepare for the workforce of the future and for the just transition, to look at those who will potentially lose their jobs as the energy transition based on renewables makes place. Additionally, countries can actually look at where the areas of investment that they can also help create new industrial activities in their own countries. So in closing, I would like to emphasize that looking at energy transition in the context of recovery is absolutely necessary. But that transition needs to be looked not only from a technology and investment perspective, but also the other areas such as energy security, industrial development, clean air, and other priorities that exist in countries that can be helped to make a dramatic shift at this point in time that is necessary for the achievement of Paris Agreement. Thank you very much.
At this session 2, we will now focus on Korea's Green New Deal, which is aiming at accelerating the transition of its economy towards a low-carbon green economy. In this session, we have 2 speakers, and then we have 6 panelists. So, first of all, I would like to invite Deputy Minister He Chang from the Ministry of Finance and Economy for sharing key messages and goals of Korean Green New Deal. Deputy Minister, you have 15 minutes.
Thank you very much. Good afternoon. My name is Chang He. It's a great pleasure to meet you, even though only virtually due to the current pandemic. In July, the Korean government introduced the Korean New Deal, including Green New Deal as one of its main policies. First, I'd like to play a short video clip introducing Korea's Green New Deal. Okay.
탄소 의존 경제에서 저탄소 경제로 한국판 유지는 대한민국 새로운 100년의 설계입니다.
국민의 삶의 질을 높이고 녹색 산업의 생태계를 지원하며 장차 탄소 넷제로 사회도 적극적으로 지향해 나가겠습니다. 25년까지 73조 원이 투자되고 일자리는 66만 개가 창출될 것입니다.
Thank you. My presentation will be in the following order. First, the background and the overview of the Korean New Deal, and then focus on Green New Deal. As a result of the COVID-19 pandemic, the Korean economy faced 2 major challenges: to recover from the economic recession and to address structural changes. I will be focusing on these 2 challenges and how the Korean New Deal aims to address them. The COVID-19 pandemic has resulted in unprecedented socio-economic crisis as the number of new cases continue to surge, fears over COVID-19 add uncertainties globally. The growth rate of GDP and trade volume have plunged with the negative rate. At the same time, as the pandemic restricts the movement of people and goods across the border, which made worse the economic recovery. Korea is also faced with falling consumption, shock to employment, and the slow exports. Amid such difficulties, the Korean government has quickly responded to the crisis with 277 trillion won of support measures, including 58 trillion won of fiscal support with 3 supplementary budgets. These effective and quick response have been the reason why the Korean economy has shrunk, at least among G20 countries. While successfully responding to the pandemic crisis, we recognized the fundamental transformation of the traditional socio-economic structure during the pandemic. That's the reason why we are preparing for the future with the Korean New Deal. For example, the increase in untapped activities since the pandemic has accelerated the shift toward the digital economy. Also, a stronger consensus on the urgency of climate action has led to growing demand for green transition, including the adoption of low-carbon and eco-friendly policies. The structural transition with disruptive innovation have also changed the type of jobs, raising concerns that the growing mismatch between labor and jobs lead to unemployment and polarization. The demand for a stronger social security system is also increased. The Korean New Deal was introduced in this context to drive the recovery from current crisis, as well as to set the national development strategy for Korea to be prepared for the post-pandemic era, make Korea a leap toward faster growth paths. Now, we will be doing an overview of Korean New Deal. The Korean New Deal is made up of 2 main components, the Digital New Deal and the Green New Deal, supported by a strong employment and social safety net. It includes fiscal investments as well as institutional reform. In addition, government investment will work as priming water to crowd in private investment and stimulate swift transformation of the socio-economic system. The Korean New Deal is mainly made up of 9 focus areas. The Digital New Deal includes 4 focus areas, including stronger integration of data network and AI throughout the economy, digitalization of education infrastructure, fostering the tech industry, and digitalization of social over the capital more smarter. The Green New Deal includes 3 focus areas, including green transition of infrastructures, low carbon and the decentralized energy system, and innovation in the green industry. Lastly, the overarching theme for stronger safety net is composed of 2 focus areas, employment and the safety net, and the investment in human resources to adapt the changing situation. In terms of investment, 160 trillion won will be invested over 5 years until 2025. This includes 114 trillion won from the Treasury, 25 trillion from local finances, from local governments, and 20 trillion won from the private sector. We also expect to create 1.9 million jobs through these policies by 2025. For the Green New Deal, 73 trillion won will be invested by 2025 to enhance the quality of life for people and to support the ecosystem of green industries. With the Korean New Deal, we plan to join international efforts to achieve zero carbon emission by 2050. First focus area of the Green New Deal is the green transition of infrastructure. We plan to turn public facilities into zero energy building, starting with the green remodeling of 230,000 old public buildings. By supporting the smart and green transition of 25 regions and by creating more green spaces in urban areas, we plan to restore terrestrial ecosystem. In addition, we will also make smart water management system through the use of artificial intelligence. Next focus area is the expansion of low carbon and the decentralized energy supply. We will transform the country into a low carbon, eco-friendly country by expanding the supply of renewable energy while building an advanced system of smart meters for efficient management of energy. In addition, we will enhance the green mobility project by supplying 1.13 million electric and 0.2 million hydrogen vehicles and supporting the scrappage of 1.16 million old diesel cars. The third focus area of the Green New Deal is building the ecosystem for green industry. We will be building 6 green integrated clusters in leading areas such as the biomaterials industry as well as 10 smart green industrial complexes. At the same time, 100 smart ecological plants and 1,750 clean factories will also be established in support of such innovation. The green industry, the R&D of green technology and the provision of adventurous capital will be promoted. Finally, how we implement Korean New Deal. Above all, we have established an overarching strategy meeting chaired by President himself, which makes key decisions on Korean New Deal. And we will also make sure that the implementation of the Korean New Deal is supported politically through close cooperation between the government and the Democratic Party, utilizing the ministerial meeting of government and the K-New Deal committee within Democratic Party. Thank you very much for your attention.
I would like to invite Professor Chung Tae-yong for sharing his suggestions and observations about Korean Green New Deal. So, Professor Chung.
Okay, thank you. First of all, it's my great honor and pleasure to be to join this timely and important occasion. And my presentation is about the something about the Korean Green New Deal. Basically, as Deputy Minister Mr. Hart mentioned and made the presentation in detail about the Korean Green New Deal. So my presentation more focus on my personal observation and including some other countries' similar programs. So let me. Okay, first of all, as I said, briefly summarizing some Green New Deal program, there are some commons and some differences, so I'll quickly touch upon that one. And then, my personal suggestions or my observations, that's the second part. Korean New Deal, well, as he said, I think the structure of the Korean New Deal, there are 3 important pillars. One is about the, digital New Deal that, as the moderator said, I think that reflects the Koreans' strengths, especially in IT technology application. And then second one is the Green New Deal program, which is the main topic of today. And the third one, I think third one is also a very important component. I think how to include this the social issues. I think how to make sure that the other Korean peoples are not behind. I think all include into this system. Those are 3 important pillars of the Korean Green New Deal structure. And he made the detailed explanations. I'll skip this one. And the U.S. climate policy, actually, the current Trump administration, they don't really highlight the importance of, the climate or green related things. But one observation is that now the Democratic, the candidate for the president of U.S. next time, the Joe Biden, he made very interesting the comment. I think one of his program is make the climate change as one of the important core U.S. national security agenda. I think it tells us a lot. I think I don't have to explain the details, but as a candidate, he had very detailed climate-related policy, including net zero target by 2050, which is very much ambitious one in case of U.S. And the Chinese case, very interesting. The observation is also China. I think that now the environmental protection make the economic the development, economic growth, and Chinese has very much detailed program like us. But one important thing is the China. When they designed the Chinese version of green growth, they said the strengthening the international cooperation. I think that makes a lot of sense to me. And yeah, I think they have detailed the program, and I'll skip that one. And the European Green New Deal, obviously, in our panels, there are two members, so I don't think it's a good idea to talk about this one. They are the experts, so I'll skip this one. But the important point that I want to make for the European version, I think that they have a little bit longer green transformation idea, I think, which is something important for Korea to think about, to learn. I think this long-term vision is very much important, but the European Union, they made very much details in their plans. So I hope to listen to our panels on this issue. Okay, so that's the quick summary of what's going on in other countries. And my suggestion for the Korean New Deal, or something maybe to think about in the future, because the Korean New Deal program has just launched a couple of months ago. So still we are in the process of making the plan more in details. So from that the point of view, my first observation is this. I think so far, Korean Green New Deal program put too much weight on the New Deal part. Shonan New Deal part means basically, in my personal opinion, we put more weight on the economic recovery, including job creation, plus Shonan, the economic packages are frankly more overweighted. And the long run green transformation is relatively light. So how to make the balance between these two different objectives, I think that's something that we have to continue to think about. I think that's the starting point of my observation. And the current Korean Green New Deal, as I said, and maybe for me, it's too much public driven. It's too much government driven. And in other words, it's too much supply driven. And maybe that's workable in the previous, in the 20th centuries. But because of the very many factors, including the factor that the moderator just mentioned, the information technologies and so on and so forth, we could understand more about the demand side or the, the consumer's response. So somehow we could incorporate that demand response into our plan. That's more ideal. And as a same token, probably how to engage the private sector more voluntary based. I think they have to make their own calculation And they think, it's good for me to jump in this program so that I could make the money. I could develop my business and so on and so forth. That part is a little bit ignored. Or I think I can say the public sector is driven. And the second one is I think this, I'm not comfortable about this long-term vision thing. I think it's not clear to me. And frankly, I think the country like Korea, as a member of this Green Alliance and the country who made the GGGI and so on, this country rather be more aggressive, saying that, look, by 2050, Korea, we're going to make the net zero emission target something. I think this, including this long-term vision, I think we have to think about a little bit more about that part. And, the last one, I think, linkage with SDGs. We have a wonderful list, 17 very detailed sustainable development goals. And when I review this our Korean Green New Deal programs and packages, there is any single word related to SDGs. That's something, SDG is also the goal by 2030, right? So it's very much related to our midterm goals. So maybe somehow we try to link it. That's a necessary condition. And the next one is, maybe it's the very nature of the climate packages, but the climate adaptation component is somewhat missing. Yeah, as Mr. Hart mentioned, I think one of the program Green New Deal, obviously it included, but it's not clearly visible. Yeah, so for example, EU has done a lot on this climate adaptation thing before, so maybe they have less attention on this issue. But the case of Korea is a little bit different. This summer, we experienced a lot of extreme weather events and also many, different weather patterns, so that the climate adaptation as a package of this Green New Deal is highly required. So somehow we want to include it. Then, again, I think investment and financing or private sector decision of their own, yeah? I think that one is more developed. Not only just, look, we make the fund, so why don't you join the fund? I think that's not enough. I think financing mechanism, financing modality, not only fund, there are a lot many things. So private sector, they are the experts, so they're going to develop their own way of financing schemes and plans. So maybe we could invite them to develop their own financial plans. I think those are 3-4 factors or items that I have observed. So for my suggestion, one, I have a couple of 2-3 things, but one is, again, I think we need, from now on, I think we are making the plan more in detail. So from now on, somehow we have to think about how to make private sector participate more in, how can I say, I think voluntary base or, something. So the private sector engagement is highly required. And the second one is, again, I think not only this program, I keep highlighting this issue in many occasions. The Korean programs are excellent in terms of planning, but the Korean plans are not that much strong compared to EU or other country in terms of evaluation and assessment and feedback and the impact assessment and so on. I think we have to really think about that part, not only talking about our inputs, but also how we're going to evaluate, how we're going to assess our performance. I think that makes our plan more in effect. So that's the second thing. And finally, the Korea as a donor, we have a lot many bilateral multilateral activities. Yeah, we are very much committed to the international community to develop this green agenda, green program. And for example, the Ministry of Finance, they have their own EDCF. That's our very important bilateral financing schemes to help the developing country. And they have very details, the program. I think this is some years program. And I look at the sector by sector, the EDCF activities, and more than half are climate related. In other words, our EDCF program to help the developing country, more than half are climate related, green related. So if we could link this one, that will be great. And second part is, as a donor agency, bilateral donor agency, we have KOICA. And KOICA also, they have their own programs. And I don't have to explain in detail because as a panel member, the KOICA senior officer is here. So the KOICA program also, 16-17% of KOICA, the program is directly related to climate change. And if I include some other sectors, it's more. So somehow our domestic green, the New Deal program could be integrated into our international effort. That will be great. Thank you for your attention and sorry for time.
That was just such a great session of the conference, and I'd like to sincerely thank all the speakers and panelists from home and abroad for this session. And the presentations and discussions today would contribute greatly to Korea's Green New Deal policy, and going beyond that, your interest in Green New Deal would have an impact all over the world. Thank you very much. This is end of the International Conference on the Green New Deal, and I wish you all of the good health and happiness. Hope to see you in person. Thank you very much.